Welcome. In this short video, we're going to talk a little bit about unemployment and its measurement and some of the issues we have to be aware of when we measure the unemployment rate. Why do we care about unemployment? Unemployment is probably one of the most personally devastating of the macroeconomic problems that we talk about. Unemployment is really costly. It takes a heavy personal toll. Divorce, domestic violence, suicide, depression, they can all rise dramatically when an area is beset by long-term unemployment. It is devastating to people. There are costs to the U.S. economy, or any economy. Lost output because we're not putting all of our labor force to work, lower tax revenue for governments due to the lack of wages and salary, the loss of human capital from people that are out of work and their skills deteriorate, or they're not currently updating their skills as much as they should. So for many reasons, this is a really very devastating problem. Consider the Great Depression, one of the most devastating examples of unemployment in the 20th century. Here's a quote of The Grapes of Wrath, which chronicles the struggle of a family with unemployment. They scampered about looking for work. The movement changed them. The camps, the fear of hunger, and the hunger itself changed them. The children without dinner changed them. The endless moving changed them. The Great Depression and that unemployment experience had a major impact on a generation for decades to come. So let's think about the measurement of unemployment. To measure the unemployment, we first want to measure the labor force. So an individual's in the labor force if they're working for pay or actively looking for work for pay. So as you can see, not all adults are going to be in the labor force. In particular, the labor force would not include children, homemakers, retirees, prisoners, full-time students, and other potentially the disabled, people with serious medical problems. They're not going to be in the labor force either. So we have to figure out who is in the labor force and then figure out who's unemployed. So as you can see, the labor force and people not working overlap, but not completely. So here we have a whole labor force. Most of the labor force is employed. Some of the labor force is unemployed. But if you look at the group of people not working, there are many not working that aren't unemployed because they're not in the labor force. So we're interested in the labor force participation rate, and that is the percentage of the labor force consisting in the adult population. So how many in the adult population are actually in the labor force, and then we convert that to a percent. 2011, for example, we have an adult population of about 249 million, a labor force of a little over 153 million. And we put that together, and we can calculate our labor force participation rate of 61.6%. The unemployment rate now, we need to know how many are in the labor force and how many of them are unemployed. So the percentage of the labor force unemployed. We need the number of unemployed as a percentage of the entire labor force. Not as a percentage of the population, as a percentage of the labor force. So in 2011, our labor force is 153.4 million, unemployed at about 13.7 million, and there we have an unemployment rate of 8.9% in 2011. By 2012, that unemployment rate had fallen a bit to 7.8% and continued to fall in the years to come. Who measures the unemployment rate? In the United States, it's measured by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is part of the Department of Labor in the federal government. One of the ways we measure unemployment is this monthly survey. And the monthly survey is 60,000 households that are contacted, and those 60,000 households are asked a series of questions about their labor market activity, about whether they are working, whether they're looking for work, etc. And when we gather this monthly data through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, here's a time series from 1960 to the end of 2012. These blue bars here represent recessions, and this line of time series data represents the official unemployment rate. So not surprisingly, unemployment rates rise dramatically during recessions, and then they fall during the expansions. The most recent recession we have here from 2007 to 2009 is no exception. A dramatically rising unemployment rate that has been falling steadily since. We're not only interested in the level of unemployment, we're interested in something called the duration of unemployment. The duration of unemployment is measuring how long people are actually unemployed. If most of the unemployed were only unemployed for 2 or 3 weeks, that wouldn't be a serious problem. However, if people who are unemployed for 6 months or more, that becomes a big problem. During a recession, duration of unemployment rises. Jobs are harder to come by, they're harder to find, and so people are unemployed for longer periods of time. And long-term unemployment becomes a very big problem in terms of the personal cost, in terms of the deterioration of human capital. Here's a time series of duration of unemployment in the recession from 2007 to 2009 and in a couple years of the recovery. Here you can see how the composition of the unemployed changes dramatically. Most of the unemployed are in a period of less than 5 weeks in 2007. But by 2011, most of the unemployed have actually been employed over 27 weeks. So that increase in the duration is very disturbing because it makes it all the much harder for people to get back into employment. When we measure unemployment and we look at the official unemployment rate, there are some issues we need to be aware of. One of the key issues here is this discouraged workers problem. This problem comes about because workers lose their job, they begin to look for another one, but they can't find anything. Rejected over and over again. What happens? People give up. You have people looking for work, but then give up and no longer try to find a job. If people aren't trying to find a job actively, they're not in the labor force. And so they disappear out of the unemployment statistics. And this is a problem, because with this group, you can imagine if someone offered them a job, they would take it gladly. But they're discouraged, they drop out, and they somehow become missing in these numbers. Discouraged worker problems are much worse during a recession, when jobs are harder to come by. Discouraged worker problems can exist during economic booms, but it's not nearly as large and not nearly as serious. But the result of a discouraged worker problem, as you can guess, is some undercounting. So an unemployment rate isn't really stating the true picture of the labor market if a bunch of people have just given up in despair. To have an idea of the discouraged worker problem and its magnitude, here's some data on unemployment rates starting in 2006 and going to about the end of 2012. If we look at these unemployment rates, this bottom line is the official unemployment rate, measured as we discussed. This middle line is a broader measure of who's unemployed, and this top line is the broadest measure that includes all discouraged workers. And you can see that there's a big gap here, a big gap. And so, for example, in 2011 we talked about the 8.9% unemployment rate, but if we put discouraged workers in there, we're at over 20%. So you can see how discouraged workers add to the unemployment problem, and our official unemployment rate can really understate the extent of the problem. Here's another picture of the same idea. So again, this lower line here is our unemployment rate, and by the end of 2012 it's down to 7.8%. But the labor force participation rate is also falling. So we look at these two lines, these two time series, and we can conclude that workers got discouraged because they couldn't find jobs during the recession. They leave the labor force, so the labor force participation rate falls as some adults leave the labor force. But when they do that, the number of unemployed as a percentage of the labor force is also falling. So this declining unemployment isn't necessarily because people got jobs, it's because people gave up and they left the labor force. That's a bad thing, and it's not something we want to see happen. Another problem in measuring the unemployment rate is the issue of underemployment. The official unemployment rate is measuring who's working. It's not measuring if they like their job. They're not measuring the job quality. Does the job really match their skill set? Are they being fully utilized? That's not what that number tells us. It also doesn't tell us necessarily the full versus part-time issue. So people who have part-time jobs but really want something full-time and can't find it, they're still employed. So the unemployment rate's not really counting the problem with the job match or the job satisfaction.